I walked into my son's backyard and heard my daughter-in-law ask, "Why is she even still alive?" I didn't leave. I walked in. Her face turned pale the moment she saw me. But it was too late. The air smelled of grilled meat and sweet wine, the kind of scent that tries to disguise something bitter underneath. For a moment, the laughter scattered like startled birds. I stood just inside the gate, holding a still-warm peach cobbler, steam slipping through the foil. Kelsey froze near the picnic table, one hand still clutching her phone, the other wrapped around a glass of wine. "Miriam, we didn't know you were coming," she said quickly. Too quickly. That bright, false tone women use when the mask has already slipped. I gave a small nod. "I brought cobbler." She blinked and forced a smile. "That's nice." Her voice trailed off. No one offered to take it. Beyond her, the yard was full of people, some family, some strangers, faces that had once been familiar, now blurred by distance. String lights hung across the patio, trembling slightly in the wind. Music hummed from a speaker on the porch, too loud, too fast, meant for a younger crowd. Andrew stood near the grill, laughing with two men I didn't recognize. He didn't notice me at first. When he finally did, he raised a hand, a small, polite wave, then went back to his conversation. I walked past the tables, past the chatter, and found an empty chair at the far end. The folding metal groaned softly as I sat. I set the cobbler in front of me, untouched, a small offering in a place that had forgotten how to receive. Lila and Mason darted through the yard, chasing each other, the smell of sunscreen and sugar in the air. They didn't look at me. Maybe they didn't recognize me without the apron, without the grocery bags or the jars of gummy worms I used to bring. Maybe they just didn't know how. Kelsey glanced over once, then away again. A few minutes later, she came closer, that rehearsed hostess smile back in place. "Did you want something to eat?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. She nodded too quickly, relief flashing across her face like a light turning off, and walked away before I could say more. I sat through the whole thing. The laughter, the noise, the little pockets of joy that didn't include me. When Andrew finally lifted his beer for a toast to family, the glasses clinked, but no one looked my way. The sun dipped behind the trees, the music softened, and the smell of citronella hung heavy in the air. Guests began to drift toward the house. I stayed behind, waiting for the quiet. When it came, I moved, slowly, deliberately. I gathered the plates, folded napkins, stacked the cups that no one had bothered to throw away. No one asked me to, but no one stopped me either. Inside, through the open kitchen door, I saw Andrew and Kelsey rinsing glasses together. She laughed, touching his arm lightly. He smiled, that easy smile he'd once given to me when he wanted something. When the tables were clear, I lifted my cobbler dish. It was empty, though I didn't know who had eaten it. The glass was still warm from the day's sun, smooth beneath my palms. I walked toward the car, the sound of the party fading behind me. My shoes pressed against the gravel. The evening air was cool now, sharp. I didn't feel anger, not the kind that burns. It was quieter than that, heavier, like a stone resting in my chest. At home, I washed the dish carefully, the smell of peaches and soap curling together in the sink. I dried it, set it upside down on the counter, and stood for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The kitchen was small, tidy. The same one where Andrew used to do his homework, elbows too wide for the table, his pencil tapping against his teeth as he worked. I could still picture him there, concentrating, hopeful, needing me. Back then, he had always looked up when I spoke. Now, years later, I couldn't even remember the last time he'd asked for my opinion on anything. I sat down at the same table with a cup of tea, my reflection faint in the window. The street outside was calm, porch lights blinking on one by one. I thought about Kelsey's words, so casual, so cruel, and about the silence that followed them. No one had spoken up, not even my son. The question echoed again, why is she even still alive? I'd always believed family was something unshakable, something built from small sacrifices, the rides to school, the casseroles, the babysitting, the endless forgiveness. But that night, I realized how easy it was to disappear inside your own generosity. I looked at the cobbler dish, gleaming clean under the kitchen light. I'd given too much for too long. That house, their house, the one filled with music and string lights, had once been partly mine. $40,000 from my retirement account. Just to help you get started, I'd said. No strings attached. Apparently, no seat at the table either. The clock ticked softly, steady and indifferent. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed, a dog barked once and stopped. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and turned off the light. The kitchen fell into darkness, but my thoughts stayed sharp. Not revenge, not sadness, just a quiet, steady resolve. Tomorrow, I would open the file cabinet in the hallway, the one with the folder labeled Andrew House. I'd pull it out, read it properly for the first time. Not to count the money, but to look at the names, to see in black and white what I had signed away. I didn't know exactly what I would do after that. I only knew I would do something. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No pacing, no pills, no restless dreams. Just the calm that comes when a decision has already begun to form. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the start of it. Morning sunlight pushed through the curtains, pale and unhurried. I woke before the alarm, the kind of waking that comes when something inside you is already alert. The house was quiet, the air still carrying the faint scent of peaches from yesterday's cobbler. I brewed coffee in my smallest pot, just 1 cup again, and sat at the table watching the steam rise and fade. The cup was chipped on one side, the same cup I'd had since before Andrew went to college. Back then, I used to fill it twice before work, rushing out the door to help pay for the tuition he said he'd handle once he got settled. He got settled, all right. Settled enough to forget who helped him stand. I finished my coffee and opened the file cabinet in the hallway. The bottom drawer stuck halfway, but I pulled until it gave with a sigh. The folders were labeled in my handwriting. Neat, deliberate, taxes, insurance, house, Andrew House. I slid that one out. It felt heavier than I remembered. Inside were the bank statements, the transfer forms, the letter I'd written all those years ago. Because you're my son. No repayment necessary. I ran my finger over the words. They'd seemed so generous back then. Love had made them easy to write. The purchase agreement was crisp, the notary stamp clear. Only 2 names appeared on the deed, Andrew Hart and Kelsey Hart. No trace of mine. I'd never even noticed how cleanly I'd erased myself from their future. I sat back, letting the papers rest on my lap. The morning light caught the edges, and I thought about the years in between. Birthdays missed, phone calls rushed, holidays where I was the afterthought. I had built their comfort brick by brick, dollar by dollar, thinking it was family I was securing. But what I'd really done was fund my own invisibility. I folded the papers carefully, slid them back into the folder, and stared at the label again. Andrew House. I almost laughed. It had always been mine at the start. My money, my trust, my belief that helping him meant belonging. It was time to stop mistaking generosity for permanence. That realization wasn't dramatic. It didn't break me open or make me cry. It was quiet, the way truth often is when you've been circling it for years. I made another cup of coffee, stronger this time, and sat with my notebook. Across the top of a blank page, I wrote, "Things I can still control." The list began small: my accounts, my will, my home, my story. Then one more name came to mind, Felicity Ward. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. We'd met at a bridge club long ago, 2 women who didn't fit the chatter about grandkids and cruises. She used to work in probate law, sharp and kind in equal measure. The kind of woman who understood both paperwork and pain. I picked up the phone and called her number, half expecting it to go to voicemail. "Miriam," she answered after 2 rings, her voice steady and familiar. "Well, that's a surprise. How are you?" "I've been better," I said honestly. "I need to ask you something. It's about property and letting go of it." There was a pause. Then gently, "Why don't you come by tomorrow? Bring whatever papers you have. We'll figure it out." "Thank you, Felicity." "You don't have to thank me yet," she said. "Just come." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, the receiver still warm in my hand. Something in me eased, not relief exactly, but direction. By afternoon, I'd gathered everything into a neat stack. Deeds, bank statements, letters. I slid them into a folder and placed it by the door. The act felt ceremonial, like preparing for a trip I should have taken years ago. That evening, the lights softened into gold. I walked through each room of the house, the living room with its fading rug, the kitchen where the clock ticked too loud, the hallway lined with photos I'd stopped updating years ago. In every frame, someone was smiling. In none of them was I the center. When Walter was still alive, we used to joke that the house had moods, how the walls seemed to listen when we argued, how the floor creaked more when he was restless. After he passed, I learned that houses only echo what you bring into them. For years, I'd brought silence. Now it was time to bring something else. I stood in front of the mirror by the front door, smoothing the wrinkles on my shirt. "You can't take the house back," I whispered, "but you can take back yourself." It wasn't defiance. It was instruction. Later that night, I wrote a short note in my journal. "Tomorrow, I'll see Felicity. I'll ask the questions I should have asked before I ever signed anything. I don't want revenge. I just want the truth written with my name on it again." I closed the notebook and felt the weight of it, small but solid. Before bed, I checked the porch light. It still worked. I hadn't replaced the bulb in months, but tonight I made a mental note to do it. Small things matter when you're building your way back to yourself. In the quiet, I imagined the next morning, the lemon smell of Felicity's house, the sound of papers rustling, her calm voice explaining what could and couldn't be undone. I didn't expect miracles, just clarity. And maybe that was the beginning of freedom, not fixing everything, but finally knowing where you stand. I turned off the lamp, slid under the cool sheets, and let the darkness settle. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't dreading tomorrow. I was waiting for it. The morning came clean, like someone had rinsed the sky overnight. I woke before the alarm, made a single cup of coffee, and sat by the window as the light crept across the table. Today wasn't about mourning. It was about reclaiming. I dressed the way women of my generation were taught to dress when something mattered. Ironed slacks, a blouse with buttons, my good shoes polished to a dull shine. The ritual wasn't vanity, it was intention. When you're about to rewrite your life, you wear something that makes you feel like the pen is in your hand again. Felicity Ward's house sat on a quiet corner shaded by maple trees, the same house where we used to play bridge years ago. She'd always been sharp, her mind like a ruler, her heart still warm underneath the precision. When she opened the door, that same calm intelligence looked out at me. "Miriam," she said, stepping aside, "you look ready." "I am," I answered. Inside, her home smelled of lemon polish and peppermint tea, tidy without being cold. Files were stacked neatly along one wall, small towers of other people's stories waiting to be resolved. She motioned for me to sit at the oak dining table. I laid the folder between us, the one marked Andrew House. The edges were softened from years of avoidance. Felicity opened it gently, her eyes scanning the pages with the practiced patience of someone who has seen too many people regret their signatures. After a while, she looked up. "You gave it freely. No repayment clause, no co-ownership. It's theirs, legally and completely." "I know," I said, "but that doesn't mean you're powerless." Her words landed like steady ground after a long fall. "You can't take the house back," she continued, "but you can stop letting them take everything else. Your accounts, your will, your medical directives, those are still yours. It's time to protect them." I stared at the papers spread before me. My name, printed clean and small, still existed there, just not where it mattered. Felicity slid a notepad across the table. "Let's start with what you can reclaim." She wrote the first words in bold strokes. "Revoke power of attorney. Update beneficiaries. Rewrite will." Then she looked at me. "Do you still want your son listed anywhere?" For a moment I saw Andrew at 10 years old, knees scraped, eyes wide, handing me a dandelion he'd called a flower. "For you, Mom," he'd said. That boy would have built me a house out of sticks if I'd asked. But that boy had grown into a man who let his wife measure my worth in years left to live. "No," I said finally. "Remove him entirely." Felicity didn't flinch. "Then we'll begin there." She brought out her laptop, fingers moving across the keys with quiet efficiency. The printer hummed. Papers slid out warm and faintly smelling of ink. "This will revoke your son's power of attorney," she said. "He'll no longer have authority over your finances or medical care." I took the pen. My hand didn't tremble. I signed my name carefully, pressing the ink deep into the page. Felicity stamped it with her notary seal, a single firm sound that felt like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Something inside me shifted. The world didn't change, but my posture did. "This isn't revenge," I said softly. It's repair, Felicity smiled. Good. Revenge keeps you tied to them. Repair sets you free. Next came the will. She opened a clean document template and turned the screen slightly toward me. Tell me what you want. I want my son removed as executor and as beneficiary. She looked at me steadily. You're sure? He has a house, a career, a family. I gave him enough. He's already shown me what he values, and it isn't me. She nodded, typed quietly, and asked, Then who will receive your estate? I reached into my purse and pulled out a worn tri-fold brochure. Its corners were creased, the ink faded slightly. Greenway Women's Shelter, the same place I'd once found a bed when life had cornered me decades ago. This, I said. When I'm gone, everything goes there. They help women start over. Seems only right that they get what's left of a woman who finally learned how. Felicity read the words on the brochure, then placed it beside my documents like it belonged there. When the will was complete, she printed it, notarized it, and slid the stack toward me. My name appeared at the top again, but now it looked different, anchored. I signed each page in calm, deliberate strokes. As the final signature dried, Felicity leaned back and exhaled softly. You're done, she said. You've taken back every piece that was still yours. Not everything, I said. Just enough to start over. She smiled, her eyes kind. That's usually all it takes. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt sharper, almost too honest. The air tasted new. Driving home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. There's a difference. At home, I placed the sealed envelope of legal documents on my kitchen table, next to a vase of wilting daisies I hadn't yet thrown out. They didn't look sad to me now, just spent, like something that had given all it could and was ready to be replaced. I made tea and sat quietly. The walls were the same, the ticking clock the same, but I wasn't. I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote, From this point forward, no decisions made out of guilt. Then below it, I began a new list. Close joint accounts. Remove Andrew from every signature. Choose a professional executor. Set up donation instructions for Greenway. Learn how to be enough for one person, me. When I finished, I looked at the top of the previous page where his name still lingered. Andrew. I drew a clean line through it. Not in anger, just clarity. Outside, the sky was turning that pale orange shade that comes right before evening, the color of forgiveness. If forgiveness had a hue. I walked to the front door and stood there a long time, feeling the solid weight of the house beneath my feet. I'd once thought I was trapped in it. Now I realized it was simply waiting for me to decide what stayed and what didn't. As the kettle clicked off behind me, I whispered into the quiet, You can't take the house back, but you can rebuild the woman who gave it away. And that was enough. That night, I slept with the folder of documents beside my bed. I didn't read them again. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I wasn't falling asleep to memories of what I'd lost. I was dreaming about what I still had left to claim. Saturday arrived with the smell of rain, soft, metallic, and patient. It wasn't the kind of storm that demanded attention, just the quiet kind that seeps into the edges of things. I put on my coat anyway. Today wasn't about comfort. It was about closure. At the bank, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, steady and indifferent. First Mutual Credit Union had always been a familiar place, rows of counters, fake plants, the faint hum of printers. I'd opened my first account there with Walter, decades ago, when we still believed shared accounts meant shared futures. I walked up to the counter and asked to see a manager. The teller, a polite young woman with gold hoop earrings, led me to a glass-walled office where a nameplate read Celia Brooks, branch manager. Celia stood as I entered. Her handshake was firm but kind. Mrs. Hart, how can I help you today? I sat, folded my hands, and said, I'd like to review every authorized user and co-signer on my accounts. Her smile softened. Of course. Give me a moment. She typed quickly, eyes moving across the screen. You have one co-signer and one authorized cardholder, Andrew Hart. That's your son, correct? Used to be, I said quietly. She paused, not out of discomfort, but respect. Would you like to remove him? I'd like to erase him, I replied. Completely. Celia looked at me carefully. No judgment, just understanding. We can certainly do that, I nodded. Remove his access. cancel his card, reissue everything in my name only. I want new security questions, new passwords. Lock all online access until I come in personally. Understood. Her fingers moved over the keyboard again, the rhythm deliberate and sure. While she worked, I looked around the small office. There was a potted pothos near the window, its vines reaching down toward the floor. Its leaves were glossy and heart-shaped, alive and unbothered. I used to have one just like it in Andrew's nursery, back when his biggest crime was trying to eat the dirt. I'd laughed so hard that day, nearly dropping the diaper bag. Celia slid a stack of papers toward me. These confirm the removals. You'll sign here, here, and here. Once complete, your accounts will exist solely under your control. I took the pen. The paper was smooth under my hand, the ink deep and final. With each signature, the noise inside me quieted a little more. When she was done, Celia looked up. Would you like to set new alerts or create a trust? We can help with that, too. Not yet, I said. For now, I just want things clean. Her smile was small but sincere. Clean is a good place to start. I thanked her, took my copies, and walked out into the rain. The parking lot shimmered, puddles forming like mirrors. The air was cool against my face. I didn't feel lighter exactly, just grounded, as if every step now belonged entirely to me. Driving home, the wipers kept a steady rhythm, almost like breathing. For years, I had let my finances, my decisions, my peace orbit around other people. Today, they had returned to me, not as power, but as stillness. At home, I hung up my coat and went straight to the hall closet. The fireproof lockbox sat behind a stack of old photo albums. I carried it to the table and opened it slowly. Inside were the fragments of my adult life, insurance papers, deeds, certificates, tax returns. I sorted through them carefully, one page at a time. I paused when I found Andrew's birth certificate. I didn't destroy it. I didn't even sigh. I simply placed it in a separate folder labeled History, then set that folder in a different drawer, away from the rest. That was the difference now. I wasn't erasing. I was curating. When the papers were in order, I wiped down the table, folded the cloth, and placed the lockbox neatly back where it belonged. My movements felt precise, almost ceremonial, as though each gesture was undoing a knot I'd carried too long. Later that afternoon, I made tea and opened my address book, the same one I'd had since the early 90s, with faded tabs and yellowed pages. Under H, I found the cluster of names written in my steady handwriting: Andrew and Kelsey, Lila and Mason. I stared at them for a long moment. Then I drew a single line through each. Not hard, just enough. The ink bled slightly on the paper, spreading like something that had waited years to be released. On the next blank page, I wrote a new name, Felicity Ward, attorney and friend. Below that, another, Greenway Women's Shelter, donation contact. And for the first time in years, the page didn't feel empty. It felt possible. Evening came soft and gray. The rain had stopped, leaving everything slick and glistening. I stood by the window and watched the drops gather on the glass before sliding down, clean paths carving through the fog. That was how I felt too, washed, not hollow. I made a simple dinner, soup and toast, the kind of meal that fills the room with quiet warmth. No television, no phone, just the sound of the spoon against the bowl. After I cleaned up, I walked through the house one last time. The living room was tidy, the lights low. The faint scent of rain drifted through the open window. In the quiet, I could almost hear the steady pulse of the world carrying on without asking anything of me. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in months, there was nothing left to fix. No apology to draft, no half-composed message to a son who wouldn't answer. Just stillness. I slid under the covers, the sheets cool against my skin. My body sank into the mattress with a kind of peace I hadn't earned before, but maybe deserved now. I didn't dream that night. I didn't need to. For once, sleep didn't feel like escape. It felt like arrival. Sunday evening settled like a soft blanket, heavy with rain that had no urgency to stop. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. I had spent the afternoon cleaning drawers, sorting papers, wiping shelves, letting go of what no longer had a purpose. The kind of day where silence doesn't ache anymore. It simply exists. Then the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. My first instinct was that it might be Andrew again, or Kelsey calling from a number I didn't recognize. But something, maybe intuition, maybe hope, made me lift the receiver. Hello? A small pause. Then a voice, uncertain but familiar. Grandma? I froze, the word landing like a pebble in still water. Lila? Yeah, is this still your number? It is, I said quietly. There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear her breathing, nervous and shallow. I found it in one of Dad's old phones. He didn't know I was looking. I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. The old instinct rose in me to rush in to make it easy. I let it pass. Why are you calling, sweetheart? I wanted to say I'm sorry. The words tumbled out quickly, fragile and trembling. For that day in the backyard, for pretending not to see you, for laughing when Mom said what she said. It wasn't funny, you just wanted to belong. I finished softly. Silence again. Then, in a voice small as rain, yes. I didn't rush to forgive her. The instinct to protect, to smooth over pain, had lived in me a long time, but I'd evicted it recently. I let the quiet sit between us like a third chair. What are you sorry for exactly, Lila? I asked, not unkindly. She took a shaky breath. For forgetting you were real. For acting like you didn't matter. At the grocery store? At the library? I saw you and I pretended I didn't. You always mattered. I just didn't want Mom to think I cared more about you than her. That sentence pierced through me, not as anger, but recognition. The quiet inheritance of shame passed from mother to child. Thank you for calling, I said. Can I see you? She asked quickly. Just me. I looked out the window. The rain was light now, tapping softly against the glass. I thought of the drawer I'd emptied, the names I'd crossed out, the peace I'd made with solitude. And yet somewhere beneath all that stillness there was space. Yes, I said finally. Come by tomorrow after school. Just you. The exhale that came through the phone sounded like relief itself. I will. I promise. After she hung up, I sat there for a long time, the dial tone fading into silence. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. The house felt different again, like a closed room after someone cracks a window. I rinsed the cup and left the kitchen as it was, clean, waiting. Monday came gray and damp, the kind of day that softened everything it touched. I woke early, swept the kitchen, set 2 plates on the table without thinking, then put one away. I baked banana bread, not for anyone in particular, just to fill the space with warmth. The smell drifted into the hallway like a memory learning how to be kind again. At 4:12, there was a knock at the door. Not hurried, not timid, just careful. When I opened it, Lila stood on the porch, her hoodie 2 sizes too big, rain clinging to her hair. Her sneakers were muddy, her eyes rimmed with something that wasn't mascara. She held the strap of her backpack like it might run if she let go. I wasn't sure you'd open the door, she said. I wasn't sure you'd knock, I answered. Inside, I led her to the kitchen. She sat at the table, fingers tracing the pattern in the wood the way small hands trace certainty. I poured tea and placed a slice of warm banana bread in front of her, a fork beside it. She didn't touch it right away. Mom says you've gone crazy, she said, voice small but honest. That you're cutting us out. I smiled faintly. I'm not cutting. I'm choosing. There's a difference. She nodded like she almost understood. I don't hate you, I added softly. I don't hate you either, she whispered. I just think I copied how they acted. And I didn't question it until I started missing you. At the library that day, I walked past you and my chest hurt the whole way home. That sentence folded something inside me. I reached for my tea, giving my hands something to do while my heart caught up. Steam rose between us like blessing. Missing someone doesn't mean you can go back to how things were, I said. It means you want to start again. She looked at me, eyes wet but steady. I want to come back, she said. If that's allowed. I studied her face, the same sharp chin as her father, but her grandmother's eyes, clear and unguarded. You can come back, I said slowly, but not for pie, not for gifts, only for truth. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, and a single tear slid down, quick and embarrassed. I handed her a napkin and didn't add a speech to it. I can do that, she said. We sat together for almost an hour. She told me about school, about an art assignment where the teacher said her drawings felt too sad for her age. She said it like a confession. Maybe sadness just knows your name early, I told her. It did mine. She finally picked up the fork, cut a corner of the bread, and ate like she was remembering something about being safe. Between bites, she told me about a stray cat that followed her home sometimes. Mom says no pets, she said, rolling her eyes just enough to be young. We both smiled. I'm not going to ask you about your parents tonight, I said. Not because I'm afraid, but because this is about you and me. We start there. She nodded, grateful. Relief softened her shoulders. When she stood to leave, I wrapped a second slice of banana bread in foil and pressed it into her hand. She held it with both palms, like something fragile. Thank you, she said. I'll come again if that's okay. It's okay, I said. Just knock. At the door she hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. Awkward, tight, earnest. I felt the familiar ache of wanting to promise her everything would be easy. I didn't. I just held on for the right amount of time. Outside, the drizzle had thinned to a hush. She pulled her hood up and walked down the driveway, shoes leaving dark ovals on the concrete. I watched until she turned the corner. The kitchen was quiet again, but the silence was different now, less like emptiness, more like calm after a long storm. The second plate still sat in the cabinet where I'd tucked it away. I took it out and left it on the counter. I picked up my journal from the counter and opened to a fresh page. My handwriting wavered slightly at first, then steadied. Not every door needs to be slammed. Some only need to be locked gently from the inside, with a window left open for those who come alone and knock with care. I closed the journal, the ink still drying, and looked toward the empty chair across from me. It no longer felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. It felt like a seat waiting for what might return. Outside, the rain had stopped. The marigolds I'd trimmed days ago were already lifting their heads toward the light. I whispered a small prayer, not for reconciliation, not even for family, just gratitude for the ordinary miracle of a careful knock and a truer beginning. The morning air smelled of rain and lemon cleaner when I stepped out of my car in front of Willow View Apartments. The sign was simple: white paint, green trim, a touch of ivy curling along the fence. Nothing about it was grand or new, but it looked honest. That was what drew me in. Monique Patel, the property manager, met me at the gate with her clipboard tucked under one arm. You're Mrs. Hart, right? I've got the keys to 1B ready for you. Her smile was warm in the way of people who do their jobs with real care. It's a small one-bedroom, but the light's good, and the neighbors are quiet, she said as we walked. That's exactly what I'm looking for, I replied. The hallway smelled faintly of paint and lavender detergent. Apartment 1B was at the end, facing the courtyard. Monique unlocked the door and stepped aside. I walked in slowly. Sunlight spilled through the wide window, touching the bare walls with soft gold. The floors creaked underfoot, not in protest, but like an old house sighing in relief at new company. There was a little balcony with 2 rails of black iron and a view of a magnolia tree just beginning to bloom. I stood there for a while, breathing. It wasn't big or fancy or sentimental, but it was mine. It didn't smell of anyone else's perfume or resentment, just fresh paint and possibility. Monique watched me quietly. Take your time, she said. I ran my hand along the windowsill. This feels like truth, I murmured. She smiled. That's what most people say when they find the right place. We sat at the small counter while she filled out the lease. Her pen moved with easy efficiency. You'll have it starting in 3 weeks, she said. Enough time to sort through what you want to bring and what you don't. I nodded, signing my name. I think I already know which is which. When she handed me the copy of the lease, it felt like a passport, proof that my life was still capable of beginning again. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I looked. Andrew stood on my porch, his jaw set tight, the rain behind him making his hair stick to his forehead. Mom, what is this? He said, holding up an envelope, the notice from my lawyer officially removing him from my accounts. I think it's self-explanatory, I said calmly, stepping aside. You can come in, but leave your tone outside. He hesitated, then entered. His eyes darted around the kitchen like he didn't recognize it anymore. Maybe he didn't. Why are you doing this? He asked. Kelsey said you're moving out, changing everything. You've cut me off financially. I poured tea into 2 cups, but slid only one toward him. Because you already did, Andrew. You just never noticed. He frowned, confused, defensive. That's not fair. I set my cup down gently. Fairness, I said, would have been someone stopping your wife when she asked why I was still alive. He froze. His mouth parted, but no words came out. Yes, I continued, my voice steady. I heard her. I heard you. You laughed, Andrew. Maybe it was polite, maybe it was awkward, but it was a laugh. His face went pale. Mom, that was just a joke. You know how Kelsey gets. I didn't mean anything by it. I looked at him for a long moment, letting the stillness fill the room. Outside, a bird called once and then went quiet again. A joke, I said softly. Do you know what makes something a joke, Andrew? He frowned. What? It needs laughter that doesn't wound. It needs love underneath it. What you did wasn't a joke. It was cruelty dressed in cowardice. He swallowed hard, looking down. Mom, you're being dramatic. No, I interrupted, my tone firm but not loud. For once I'm being clear. You don't get to decide what hurts me. You don't get to explain away disrespect because it's convenient. He exhaled sharply, pacing. You're throwing away your family over one mistake. I shook my head. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm putting things where they belong. He stopped pacing. So that's it? That's it, I said, standing. I'm moving to Willow View in 3 weeks. It's small but peaceful. You won't have to worry about me anymore. His shoulders stiffened. And what am I supposed to tell Kelsey? Tell her the truth, I said simply, that your mother finally decided to live with herself. He opened his mouth to reply, then shut it again. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was empty, hollow in a way he didn't know how to fill. Mom, he said at last, his voice quieter. You really mean it, don't you? Yes, I said. I'm not erasing you, Andrew. I'm just choosing myself, for once. He stood there a few seconds longer, then nodded awkwardly and turned toward the door. Take care, he muttered. I already am, I said. When the door closed, the house fell back into its familiar hush. The teacup he hadn't touched sat cooling on the counter. I stared at it for a while before carrying it to the sink, rinsing it clean and setting it upside down to dry. That small sound, the click of porcelain against porcelain, felt like a door finally closing right. I didn't cry right away. I made dinner first, soup and toast again. I folded laundry. I fed the marigolds out back. And then, when the world was quiet enough to hold it, I sat down on the edge of my bed and let the tears come. I counted because I always did things with intention now. 7 minutes. No more, no less. They weren't wild sobs. Just a steady release, a kind of mourning. A small funeral for the mother I used to be, the one who waited to be seen, to be chosen. When the timer on my phone chimed softly, I wiped my face, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Rest in peace." Then I turned off the light. The house was calm again. No ghosts, no bitterness, only space. Space for something new. The following Saturday unfolded like a memory already softened at the edges. The sky was clear, the air still, and the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and the lavender candle I'd lit that morning. The moving boxes stood against the wall, half-filled and patient. That afternoon I laid out my mother's porcelain tea set, the white one with tiny blue violets. It had survived decades of holidays, moves, and arguments, but somehow the pattern had never faded. I set out 4 cups. For once, I knew exactly who they were for. At 2 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. "Don't get up, Miriam. I still know where you keep your spare key," Ruth Carter called from the porch, laughing. Her voice carried the kind of joy that arrives without permission. She was first through the door, her scarf bright as a summer garden. Behind her came Helen Morris, careful and steady, and Beatrice Lane, with her cane tapping gently against the threshold. "Good heavens, it smells like heaven in here," Helen said as she unwrapped her shawl. "It's just the candle," I said, smiling, "and maybe the banana bread." "Then we approve of both," Beatrice replied. We gathered in the kitchen, the heart of the house. I poured tea, the steam curling upward like a quiet blessing. Ruth passed around the small plates. Helen spread jam with delicate precision. Beatrice reached for sugar cubes and muttered, "I'm old enough to stop pretending I take it plain." We laughed, the kind of laughter that doesn't have an audience, only company. The conversation wandered easily, the way it always did when no one was keeping score. Ruth talked about her granddaughter's piano recital, Helen complained gently about her stubborn roses, and Beatrice confessed she'd started talking to her radio at night, because at least it listens. No one mentioned Andrew. No one mentioned loss or betrayal or family politics. The silence around those subjects wasn't awkward, it was merciful. We had all lived long enough to know that sometimes the kindest thing a friend can give you is space to talk about something else. When the teapot ran low, I refilled it and said, as naturally as I could, "I'm moving next month." They each paused, but not in surprise, just acknowledgement. "To the new apartment?" Ruth asked gently. "Yes. Willow View, apartment 1B. Helen nodded approvingly. "Good light in that area. My niece used to live there." Beatrice smiled, stirring her tea. "You always did look better in sunlight." No one asked why. No one offered pity disguised as advice. They didn't need to. Their eyes said it all. We know. We've been there too. Ruth reached across the table and touched my hand. "It's time, isn't it?" "It is," I said. "I thought I'd be sadder about leaving, but I'm not. I think I was gone long before the boxes." Helen exhaled softly. "Leaving doesn't always mean losing. Sometimes it's the only way to stay whole." The room went quiet after that, not from sorrow, but from understanding. We sat in that stillness, the afternoon light washing over the table, catching the edges of our teacups like small halos. Ruth broke the silence first, chuckling. "You remember when we used to meet here for those so-called book clubs? 3 years of pretending we'd all read the same novel." Beatrice laughed so hard her teacup rattled. "Oh, I remember. You two were too busy gossiping to get past the first chapter." Helen wagged a finger. "Speak for yourselves. I finished every book. I just didn't understand half of them." The laughter came in waves, real, unguarded, effortless. For a moment, I saw us as we must look from outside. 4 women with silver in their hair, sitting around a kitchen table, refusing to be lonely. When the laughter faded, I realized something simple and immense. I had not felt this safe in years. No one here was pretending. No one was waiting for their turn to speak. The sunlight shifted lower, turning the floor a soft amber. I stood and refilled the pot one last time, savoring the small ritual of pouring, stirring, sipping. When the tea was gone, Ruth helped me rinse the cups. Helen folded the napkins. Beatrice wiped the counter, though she didn't need to. None of them asked if I needed help packing. They knew I didn't. What they offered was rarer, presence without fixing. At the door, Ruth hugged me first, whispering, "You're doing the right thing." Helen kissed my cheek. "Send us the address. We'll bring the tea next time." Beatrice smiled, her eyes bright. "You've always had a home, Miriam. You just had to remember where it was." When the door closed behind them, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of laughter, the warmth of tea still cooling in the pot, the scent of lavender and friendship lingering in the air. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down. The sunlight had faded to a soft glow, the kind that doesn't ask for attention. I looked at the 3 empty cups, their rims faintly stained with lipstick, and felt something close to gratitude rise in my chest. Later, I opened my journal and wrote, 3 women drank tea in my kitchen today. No one interrupted. No one needed to explain. The air felt honest, the kind that only friendship can hold. I paused, then added one more line. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who pour tea without asking what broke the cup. I closed the journal, set it beside the empty tray, and let the quiet settle again. The clock ticked softly, patient and forgiving. Outside, dusk pressed gently against the windows. I stood, looked around the kitchen one last time, and smiled. The house that had once felt like a burden now felt like a witness. It had seen humiliation, anger, resolve, and now, peace. In a few weeks, the rooms would belong to someone else. But this moment, 3 friends, one afternoon of truth and tea, would always be mine. The doorbell rang at 10:42 a.m., sharp on Wednesday. I knew it wasn't the postman. He came closer to noon, give or take. It wasn't Ruth either. She always knocked twice and waited like she was apologizing for the noise. No, this knock was deliberate, assertive, practiced. When I opened the door, Kelsey Hart stood there in a cream-colored coat too thin for the weather and heels that didn't belong on my front steps. Her lipstick was perfect. Her eyes were not. "Miriam," she said, as if reading the name off a file. "Kelsey," I replied, stepping aside just enough to show courtesy, not invitation. She didn't wait. She stepped inside like someone reclaiming lost territory. Her perfume filled the air before her words did. "This," she said, turning to face me in the middle of the living room, "has gone too far." I raised an eyebrow. "What has?" She dropped her purse on the couch, my couch, and clasped her manicured hands together like she was delivering a business presentation. "Blocking Andrew, changing your accounts, cutting ties with the family. You're hurting people." "I see." I motioned toward the table. "Would you like to sit?" She didn't. "You can't just erase us because of one bad day." I smiled faintly, almost kindly. "It wasn't one bad day, Kelsey. It was years. Years of being tolerated instead of loved, dismissed instead of heard. That Sunday was just the day I stopped pretending not to notice." Her jaw tightened. "We never asked you for anything." "That's exactly the problem," I said evenly. "You never asked. You just assumed. You expected. You built your comfort on the idea that I would always give." She blinked, thrown off balance by the calmness of it. "This isn't fair. Andrew's been worried sick." I tilted my head. "Has he? Or is he just uncomfortable now that the giving stopped?" She frowned. "He's your son." "Yes," I said, "and I was his mother before I became his convenience." Her eyes flashed. "You're twisting things. You're making everyone out to be villains." "I'm just remembering clearly," I said. "It's amazing how different the story sounds once you stop whispering it." Kelsey began pacing, her heels tapping sharp against the hardwood. "You think you're making some grand statement, but what happens when you're alone? When no one calls? When no one visits? When Ruby grows up and forgets?" I met her gaze without blinking. "Then I'll be alone in truth, not surrounded by people afraid to look me in the eye." The air between us went still. Even the clock seemed to stop for a heartbeat. She crossed her arms. "You know, everyone thinks you're overreacting, that you're just bitter." I smiled, slow and measured. "People love to call a woman bitter once she stops feeding them sweetness." She scoffed, glancing at the boxes near the door. "So you're really moving? Just walking away from your family?" "I'm walking toward myself," I said. "There's a difference." Her voice cracked a little. "Andrew says you won't even answer his calls." "He had years to talk," I said. "He just waited until I stopped listening." For the first time, Kelsey hesitated. The fight slipped from her eyes for half a second, replaced by something quieter, confusion maybe, or the faint ache of recognition. "Miriam," she said, softer now, "you're making a mistake. You'll regret this." I shook my head. "Regret belongs to the past, Kelsey. I'm busy with the present." She looked around as if the house might take her side. "You're throwing everything away." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm finally keeping what matters." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to say. The silence stretched long enough for her to understand that the conversation was over. Finally, she grabbed her purse, straightened her coat, and moved toward the door. "Don't expect us to come running when you change your mind," she said, her tone brittle. "I'm not running," I replied, "and I won't." She stared at me for another second, maybe waiting for me to soften, to reach out, to apologize for the discomfort my boundaries caused. I didn't. She left. The door closed behind her with a sound that was less slam than punctuation, a full stop. For a while I stood still, listening to the quiet return. Then I exhaled, a long, deep breath that reached somewhere old inside me. The air felt clean again. I walked to the window and watched her car pull away. She didn't look back. That was fine. I wasn't waiting anymore. A few minutes later, I sent a text to Lila. "Some doors need closing, sweetheart, but not the one between us." A heart emoji came back almost instantly. I smiled. The phone rang again not long after. I recognized the voice the moment I picked up. "Miriam, it's Felicity Ward." Her tone was warm, efficient. "Everything's finalized. The trust, the accounts, the will, it's all officially under your control. No shared access, no contingencies. You're the sole decision maker now." For a second, I didn't speak. The words landed heavier than I expected, not as triumph, but as relief. "Thank you, Felicity," I said finally, "for helping me put my name back on my own life." She chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised how many people call that revenge." "It's not," I said. "It's repair." Before hanging up, she added gently, "You've done something most people never do, Miriam. You've told the truth and stayed to live in it." After the call ended, I stood in the middle of the room. The light outside had shifted to that pale gold hour when everything looks softer, forgiven. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once cried over bills, birthdays, and small betrayals, and opened my journal. The pen felt steady in my hand. They call me strong now, but only because I started saying no. They call me distant, but only because I stopped kneeling. Maybe this is what freedom sounds like, silence, unafraid of itself. I closed the journal, the ink still glistening faintly, and looked around the half-packed room. Nothing about the space felt lonely. It felt spacious, honest. Outside, the wind stirred the marigolds I'd planted weeks ago. They bent slightly, then straightened again. I smiled. They knew how to weather a storm, too. The morning I moved, the sky was the color of pewter, soft, patient, undecided. I woke before dawn, made coffee in the chipped blue mug I'd used for 20 years, and stood barefoot in the kitchen. The floor was cool beneath my feet, the kind of cold that wakes you up gently. The movers arrived at 9 sharp, 2 polite young men with kind eyes and strong backs. They worked quickly, surprised by how few boxes I had. I'd labeled everything clearly. Kitchen, keep. Bedroom, essentials. Closet, donate. There wasn't much left of the life I once built, but everything that remained had meaning. By noon, the house that had held me for 43 years was nearly empty. I walked through each room slowly, brushing my fingers against the walls, the door frames, the banister I'd polished 1,000 times. In the hallway, I paused where Andrew's growth marks had once been, now painted over, but still faintly visible in the light. I whispered, "Thank you," to no one and to everything. On the console table by the door, I left a small envelope addressed simply, "For this house." Inside was one key and a note that read, "You taught me everything I needed to know about staying and when to leave." Then I locked the door for the last time. Willow View Apartments was quiet when I arrived, the afternoon sunlight stretching across the courtyard like a lazy cat. Monique Patel was waiting for me outside 1B, her clipboard under one arm and a wide smile that made the place feel like home before I'd even stepped in. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hart," she said. "Or should I call you Miriam?" "Miriam, please," I replied. She handed me a small ceramic pot shaped like a cat. Inside was a tiny green plant with round leaves. "It's a succulent," she said. "Hard to kill, even for people who forget to water." I laughed softly. "Then we'll get along fine." Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and clean air. The movers set the boxes down exactly where I asked. The walls were bare, the space smaller than my old kitchen, but it felt right, honest, without pretense. Monique lingered by the doorway. "If you need anything, the office is just down the hall. And the community board by the mailboxes has all sorts of events, garden swaps, bingo, even a book club." I smiled. "Thank you. For the plant and the kindness." She nodded, and when she left, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I unpacked slowly that afternoon. The first thing I set on the counter was the kettle. The second was the drawing from Lila, the woman seated at a chessboard, her side nearly empty except for 2 pieces, both perfectly placed. I hung it near the window where the light caught it softly. "She's not losing," Lila had said when she gave it to me. "She's just playing smarter." I smiled at the memory. That evening, I sat on the balcony with a blanket over my knees, eating toast and honey while the air shifted from gold to blue. The magnolia tree below shimmered in the wind, its petals opening like small lanterns. I didn't feel lonely, just quiet, free. A car pulled up in the distance. I recognized it before I wanted to. Andrew. He parked halfway along the curb, sitting in the driver's seat for a long minute before stepping out. He looked older than I remembered, maybe from worry, or maybe just from the weight of finally seeing things clearly. He walked up to my door and hesitated. Then he knocked. Once. Twice. I stayed where I was, holding my cup of tea. I didn't move. "Mom." His voice called softly through the door. "Please, silence." He knocked again. I just want to talk." Still, I said nothing. He sighed, a sound more tired than angry. "Okay, I get it. I'll leave this for you." When I heard his footsteps fade, I finally stood and opened the door. A plain white envelope sat on the mat. I picked it up, my fingers trembling only slightly. Inside, a handwritten letter. "Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if you want me to. I said things I can't unsay. I let things happen I should have stopped. I don't know how to be the man you deserved. But Ruby talks about you every day now. She's different, braver, and that came from you. I'm sorry. I hope one day you'll let me try. Love, Andrew." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my dresser, beside the old photograph of me and Walter painting the front porch. Not forgiveness, not refusal, just a stone placed where it belonged. Steady, no longer sharp. Lila came by 2 days later after school, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a grin that carried summer with it. "I brought cookies," she said, holding up a plastic container, "and a magazine with a quiz about what type of flower you are." "I think you're a lilac," I laughed. "And you?" "Marigold," she said proudly. "Strong, hard to uproot." "That fits," I said, and she beamed. We sat on the little balcony eating cookies, the city hum faint beneath us. She told me about school, her art projects, and the cat she'd finally convinced her mother to let her feed. Not keep, just feed, she clarified. After she left, I found cookie crumbs on the floor and smiled as I swept them up. Days began to find their rhythm. I started walking each morning to the corner market. The man behind the register, a kind soul named Paul, learned my name by the third visit. "You're the banana bread lady, right?" he said once, grinning. "That kid with the bike talks about you all the time." I laughed. "That would be my granddaughter." "Well, tell her she's got good taste and company," he replied. I planted basil on my windowsill, the leaves small and tender. The first batch wilted. The second thrived. Each morning, I'd turn the pot a little so it could find the light. I suppose I was doing the same. On Sundays, I joined a group of neighbors who shared homemade food on the courtyard benches. We traded recipes and stories, never histories. There was a retired teacher, a widower who fed stray cats, and a woman who made soup from scratch every Tuesday. No one asked about my past. No one expected explanations. They just passed the salt and said, "Try this, it's good." It was the kind of simple belonging I hadn't known I missed. Weeks passed. My apartment filled with small, deliberate things. The cat-shaped planter, the kettle, the marigold drawing, the faint scent of basil, the sound of laughter from the courtyard below. I woke each morning to sunlight sliding across the floor and thought, this is what peace sounds like when it finally learns your name. One afternoon, I sat at the table with my journal and wrote, "I used to measure my worth by who showed up at my door. Now I measure it by the sound of my own laughter and the smell of banana bread cooling on the counter. Freedom isn't loud. It's gentle. It tastes like basil and honey." I closed the journal and looked toward the window, where the basil leaves leaned into the light. They were growing slowly, stubbornly, beautifully. So was I. The morning of my 73rd birthday arrived without ceremony. No balloons, no cards on the doorstep, no phone calls waiting to be answered. The light slipped through the curtains like a kind visitor, soft and patient. Outside, the magnolia tree was just beginning to bloom again. I made pancakes. 2 of them, small imperfect circles that sizzled softly in the pan. I drizzled them with honey, sliced a pear on top, and ate slowly at my kitchen table. The same table that had once felt too big for one person now felt just right. At noon, there was a knock on the door, gentle, familiar. "Come in, sweetheart," I said before she even spoke. Lila stepped inside, carrying a bouquet of red tulips still wrapped in brown paper. Their color filled the whole room, like little sparks of life. "You're not a birthday cake person," she said with a grin. "So I brought flowers like grown-ups do." I smiled. "They're perfect." She handed me an envelope next. Inside was a handmade card painted in watercolor, 2 chairs on a porch, one empty, one with a teacup resting on the arm. Beneath it, in her careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for keeping a seat for me." The sentence caught me in the chest. I blinked, breathing through the warmth that rose behind my eyes. "Do you like it?" she asked, suddenly shy. "I love it," I said. "It's the best gift I've ever received." We sat down with tea, no candles, no gifts wrapped in paper, just the sound of spoons clinking against porcelain. Lila had grown taller, her hair tied back neatly, her voice sure and steady in a way that hadn't been before. She told me she'd applied for a summer volunteer program at the Greenway shelter, the same place where I'd once found refuge so many years ago. "I want to help," she said. "You always said some doors open for us, and some were meant to hold open for others. I think this is one of those." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's exactly what it is," she smiled. "I put your name down as a reference, if that's okay." "It's more than okay," I said. "It's an honor." We talked about her classes, her art, and how she'd finally stood up to a teacher who made fun of one of her drawings. "I told him sadness doesn't make you broken," she said. "It just means you've been paying attention." I laughed softly. "You sound wiser than 17. She tilted her head. "You sound happier than 73. "Maybe we're both growing into the right age," I said. After she left, I placed the tulips in a tall glass vase by the window. The sunlight caught them just right, petals glowing like fire against the pale walls. Then I noticed the little light blinking on my phone. One message. I pressed play. Andrew's voice hesitant. "Happy birthday, Mom." I didn't send a card. I figured I haven't earned that yet. "Just wanted you to know I'm still here." That was all. I didn't reply. Not from anger, just from peace. Some words don't need echoing. They just need somewhere to land quietly. And sometimes silence is the most respectful ending. That afternoon, I brewed another pot of tea and set out 4 cups. At 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. Ruth came first, carrying a small lemon tart. Helen followed with a jar of honey, from a friend who swears it cures everything. Beatrice brought a bag of scones, still warm. We settled around the table like we had so many times before. No decorations, no talk of age, just the comforting noise of women who knew how to make an afternoon enough. We talked about Ruth's stubborn knee, about Beatrice's flirtatious mailman, about the grocery store charging extra for paper bags. Ordinary things, real things. There was laughter, the kind that doesn't demand an audience, and a pause afterward, the comfortable kind that only exists between people who've stopped pretending. I looked around my little apartment. The kettle whistled softly on the stove, the basil plant leaned toward the window, and sunlight fell across Lila's drawing on the wall. It struck me then, this was my family now. Not the one tied by blood, but the one formed by kindness, by truth, by choice. When the tea ran out, Ruth rinsed the cups while Helen packed up the leftover tart, insisting I keep it. Beatrice kissed my cheek and said, "You look good in peace." After they left, I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening, not for footsteps leaving, not for silence returning, but for the sound of life continuing softly, steadily. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with my journal, the same one that had followed me through endings and beginnings, and opened to the last page. The basil leaves swayed gently on the sill beside me, releasing a faint, sweet scent. My handwriting had grown slower, rounder with time, but the words came easily. They once asked why I was still alive. Now I can answer, to remember my name, to set my own table, and to keep the door open just wide enough for those who knock with clean hands. I set the pen down and closed the book, feeling the quiet settle like a blanket. Outside, the magnolia petals were falling one by one, soft, silent, complete. I didn't think about who might call next year or who wouldn't. I didn't think about what was lost. I thought about the tulips blooming in their vase, the laughter that had filled my small kitchen, and the seat that would always be waiting for truth, for kindness, for whoever came gently. And in that stillness, I realized something simple and absolute. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. If Miriam's story touched something in you, that quiet courage, that rediscovery of self, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Maybe you've had to set your own table, too. Maybe you've learned that peace isn't silence, it's honesty. If you'd like to hear more stories of strength, second chances, and the soft kind of power that comes with age, subscribe. Every week, we bring you true-to-life stories that remind us it's never too late to begin again.